You should see people coming in. Hi, Dave. Should be coming in. Barbara, Michelle, wonderful. Hi, everyone. As you're coming in, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We always like to know where you're watching us from. Um, I'm sure we must have people from across the country. And then, oh, Emily's here, and I know she's in Maryland. So yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. Sure, we probably have some people from California too, from the West Coast. I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator here at the Mark Twain House Museum. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program for LA Birdmen, West Coast Aviators, and the first air show in America. Virtual programs like this are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are grateful to honor his memory with these programs. And I just want to say thank you also to our members. I know there are a couple of you in the audience tonight, in the virtual audience. If you're not a member, please consider the museum, please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. There are so many benefits to becoming a member. You'll receive free or discounted admission to our author programs, free or discounted admission to the house and museum, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. Please visit our website for more information. Membership really pays off very quickly. So if you love author programs, maybe after a couple or a handful of programs, membership will pay off. So I highly recommend it. Now on to our guests this evening. Our author, Richard J. Goodrich, earned his PhD at St. Andrews and spent 20 years teaching ancient history in Britain and the United States. In addition to 6 academic texts, he is the author of Comet Madness, How the 1910 Return of Halley's Comet Almost Destroyed Civilization. We did a virtual program for that as well, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. Just look up Mark Twain Programs. Our moderator, Kevin O'Connor, is a professor of history at Gonzaga University. He has taught there since 2004. He's the author of a number of books, including The History of the Baltic States, Culture and Customs of the Baltic States, and Intellectuals and Apparatchiks. During this event, we encourage you to have a conversation with each other in the chat. If you have a specific question, though, please post that directly into the Q&A section. It is at the bottom of the screen. There is a talk bubble with a question mark in it, and it says Q&A. So just click on that, type your question there, and we'll be getting to it either as we go along or at the end. So that is all from me for now. Please sit back and enjoy this conversation, and I'll turn this over to Richard and Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Connor. Thank you for that introduction. I'll take the lead on this because I thought we might start with just introducing the book that we're going to be discussing. And then I'm going to have a bunch of questions for the author, Dr. Goodrich, Richard J. Goodrich, about this interesting turn in his career and this focus on early 20th century stories from America. So the book that we are discussing today is titled L.A. Birdmen, West Coast Aviators and the First Air Show in America. It's set in the early 20th century, focusing on an air show that took place in Los Angeles and all the trials and all the competitions and all the shows that took place in the early years of the 20th century that led up to this seminal event in California in 1910. What it reminds me of as I was reading this book, because it's a story about a competition. Competition between pilots, competitions between dirigibles and engine-driven planes for the future of the skies. And it kind of reminded me, maybe some of you might remember the 1970s cartoon Wacky Races, with all of its different characters and all their different machines, all competing to win this crazy race. And that's exactly what this book reminds me of. And that gives you a sense of what a romp this book is and how it leads you towards this really edifying and fascinating conclusion. So that's the basic gist of the book is that it's talking about West Coast aviation in the early years of the 20th century with a particular focus on the West Coast and that is California. What I find fascinating about this, and maybe we can start with this, Richard, is the characters. That you have these interesting characters from all kinds of walks of life. You've got French pilots, you've got these ingenious tinkerers, West Coast daredevils, ambitious promoters, all of whom contribute in one way or another to the early achievements of aviation in America. So I wonder if you might be willing to speak to tell our audience about a couple of these fascinating characters. I have in mind, in particular, Tom Baldwin, Captain Tom, and also Roy Knabenshue. These are interesting characters who come from unusual backgrounds and yet found their way in early modern aviation, or I should say, modern aviation in the early part of the 20th century. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Omar, for having me back again this year. It's lovely to be here and lovely to be with all of you and get a chance to talk about LA Birdmen. Um, Wacky races. I wish I had thought about that. I would have stuck that in the original book proposal that when we are shipping it off to the publishers, because that would have been a selling point, I think. But I think your analogy is really correct and spot on because you do have a very eccentric collection of characters. And they forced me to change the original plan of the book because I really wanted to write about the Los Angeles International Aviation Exposition, which took place January 10th to 20th. I had never heard of the thing, but it was the first real aviation show in America. It was the first time airplanes, heavier than air machines, had flown west of the Mississippi. And this is an age where people are still questioning whether this can still happen. And so I'd really begun working on this project thinking it was going to be a book about an air show, 10 days long, and all the amazing things that happened. But the more and more I worked on it, the more convicted I became that I couldn't just begin there because all these characters kept calling out to me and saying, no, you've got to tell our stories before you get to the air show. And so the air show got squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And so it's about the last third of the book now. And the first two thirds are the story of how these strange characters that Kevin alluded to um, really are America's pilots. And this, I think, is one of the, if you want a big shocking revelation, the idea that if you were to fly back in time to, say, 1906 and find somebody on the street and say, well, who's America's pilots? Who's doing the flying right now? You would expect them to name the two obvious choices, Orville and Wilbur Wright. And that is a very anachronistic sort of thing in the sense that we acknowledge that now, and we don't want to take anything away from their rights. What they did was fantastic and really laid the groundwork for the aviation industry. But in 1906, although the Wrights had flown at Kitty Hawk, most people didn't believe they had. So the Wrights were incredibly secretive. Um, they were deathly afraid that someone was going to steal their ideas and steal their machine and beat them into the air before they had patent protection. So consequently, the Wrights won't make public flights until 1908. If you were to go back to 1906 and say, well, who are America's pilots? They're going to name Captain Tom Baldwin, Roy Knabenshue, Lincoln Beechey, August Greth. These are the people who have captured America's attention with their daring aviation feats. Now, Captain Tom, who Kevin just alluded to, he was almost the king of characters in the book, I suppose you could say. Uh, he had a very strange history, and it was mostly a manufactured history that he told newspapers, which was that at the end of the Civil War, rebels had killed his parents and orphaned him, and he was forced to go live in foster care, essentially, and then was so dissatisfied with that as a young man, he ran away and joined the railroad. One day, a circus manager was riding on a train and he saw this boy doing tricks up and down the roofs of the carriages and said, boy, you should be in the circus. And so Tom thought that was a great idea, and he ran away from the railroad and went and joined the circus. And so he was a circus performer, specifically an acrobat and high wire artist for many years. He's going to work his way out to California and start doing tricks in San Francisco eventually. So San Francisco becomes his home base. When he's first performing, he's Professor Tom Baldwin. So you have to have a stage name, and he started off as a professor. And then he got interested in more dangerous tricks. And the problem, if you're in the daredevil business, as Tom was, is you always have to come up with a new trick and hopefully a more frightening trick, so you get all the people to come and pay their quarters to watch you avoid death, hopefully. So Tom heard that some men had kind of come up with an early parachute, and he did some testing of this device, and he came up with a clever idea that he would ride a hot air balloon up to 1,000 or 2,000 feet. He would have that parachute kind of wedged out on a pole, and the canopy was connected at the top, and he had a trapeze bar, and he would swing down, and so he was dangling beneath the canopy and then let go of the rope that was still holding it through a pulley, and then he would drift, hopefully, safely back down to the earth. And so this daredevil jump became kind of a signature trick of Tom Baldwin. But of course, he had to change his name. He became Captain Tom Baldwin at this point. So he moved away from being a professor and started doing something else with his life and the new rank. And eventually, he got into flying balloons, and ultimately, he decided to get into a dirigible competition. I feel like I'm monopolizing this answer here, but maybe we can leave off with Tom for a few minutes, and Kevin, if you want to redirect there.
Yeah, so since you raised the word dirigible, let's talk about dirigibles versus so the the book is partly about this race between dirigibles and heavier than air machines that are winged and driven by engines. And the question is, who's going to be the winner? And for a number of years, it seems like dirigibles had the greatest potential for commercial applications and military applications. And that seems kind of counterintuitive because we know that the airplane wins out in this competition ultimately. So why is it that there was so much interest, or I should say, why is it that many people would have been betting on dirigibles around 1906 or 1907 rather than airplanes?
The short answer is because they could see them fly, and they couldn't see an airplane flying anywhere. So again, remember, the Wrights are claiming they've flown, but who's ever seen them fly? Many we might call now crackpot or maybe optimistic inventors claim they had a heavier than air flying machine, but again, they never seemed to actually work. 2 months before the Wright brothers flew in Kitty Hawk in October of 1903, a French immigrant named August Greth, also in San Francisco, finished putting an engine onto an airframe which hung beneath a large elongated silk balloon filled with hydrogen. And this was the California Eagle. And he made the first flight, the first dirigible flight in America. And he flew for several miles and eventually splashed down in San Francisco Bay. So he had some problem when he couldn't get his engine restarted after he'd been to some hydrogen. And so this is really the first motorized flight in the United States. And so you often see the Wright brothers are credited with the first motorized flight. In fact, they didn't actually do that. The Wright brothers made the first heavier than air motorized flight. But August Greth is able to do this. A year later, Tom Baldwin, who we've just been talking about, is hired on to be his pilot, and and Greth builds a larger version of the machine, and some flights of that are made, the second California Eagle. But all of these guys are pointing sort of like a compass towards a lodestone towards St. Louis, because the St. Louis Exposition had been announced, and in 1903, the people of St. Louis, commemorating the Louisiana Purchase, were going to have an exposition that'd be even grander than what Chicago had done at the 1893 World's Fair. So they wanted to completely eclipse Chicago. And they came up with this very clever idea. Because these dirigibles had gotten into the air and they were flying in France, and the first flights had been made in America, the organizers of the St. Louis Exposition said, we'll give a $200,000 prize to anybody who can fly a 15-mile triangular course at an average speed of 15 miles per hour. And that $200,000, you think, well, maybe that doesn't sound like so much today. I mean, it is obviously, but it was in modern monetary terms, adjusted for inflation, it's about $7 million. So
If
this
I'm
was
not if I'm not mistaken, that prize went unclaimed, right? Because
that price did
one
go
of the
unclaimed.
fascinating aspects of this book is, we read about the successes of early aviation, not early modern aviation, the early aviation,
Mhm.
but we don't often hear about the failures. And the first half of your book is just littered with the catastrophes. No, I mean not catastrophes, but with the failures of these daring pilots.
Well, that was failure. I mean, August Greth, he got off the ground. He's generally not credited with making a full flight because he didn't return to his base. You know, he had to crash land essentially in San Francisco Harbor. But if you think about it, neither did the Wrights. The Wrights flew in a straight line forward and landed in the sand, 600 feet on the fourth flight that they made. And that was their best flight in 1903. Um, so yeah, but yes, you're absolutely right. Failure was the modus operandi of the day, and pretty much all these experiments failed for one reason or another. But people are pushing the envelope and learning new things with each failure. But it is these dirigibles that actually make it into the air first in a very public way. And so um, the problem for St. Louis is they had to delay the exposition for a year because it took too long to build all the buildings. They built this very expensive aviation pavilion, and then there was nobody there to fly out of it. Nobody had reached the point where they could do this. They invited the Wright brothers to come, but no, the Wright brothers weren't interested in making a public display. Even if I don't know if they could have done 15 miles at this point, but if they had, that'd be a clean 200,000, which would be pretty nice. It was Captain Tom Baldwin who finally showed up with a dirigible and saved the show. So he showed up with he had split with August Greth by this time over some problems about ego, generally speaking. Tom was very much a moth who liked the very center of the spotlight, no question about it. And so he came to St. Louis. They had had a whole long, dry summer waiting for somebody to fly. Imagine you have this very expensive aviation pavilion, which you've built, and a couple of people have brought flying machines, but none of them are working. If you're the organizer, if you're the person who came up with this brilliant idea and you're looking at all this money that you've lost and all of the jeering from the rest of the country, I mean, this is a very humiliating position. Tom showed up in October and said, yeah, I can fly. And he brought the envelope from the dirigible that he'd built, the California Arrow, and he brought him a motor, an engine, but he didn't have anything else. And so he drafted a young man from Toledo, Ohio, named Roy Knabenshue, who was a balloonist by day, or balloonist on his holidays. And he was an electrical engineer. He worked for the telephone company, basically, was his day job. His father absolutely hated the idea that Roy would do something as dishonorable as be a showman, work at carnivals and take people for balloon rides. He thought that was absolutely scandalous. And so there's this intense pressure from his family to give up flying, give up ballooning, give up this strange idea you have, and just be a sensible person working for the phone company, nice, stable job, buy food, feed your family, that sort of thing. So Roy had really gone to St. Louis as kind of his last chance, if I can't get something going here, well, I'll probably just have to go back and take a better job in another city with the phone company. And he got there, he teamed up with Captain Tom. As I said, Tom hadn't brought all the parts for his dirigible, but he assured the organizers that he could put on an air show. He could get a machine airborne, which hadn't been seen anywhere around there. But he didn't want to, gamble on the $200,000 prize. He wanted a fixed contract. So if he made 4 flights, the organizers would pay him a sum. The sum is not recorded how much they're going to pay him off. But they were so desperate this time, and they so doubted that he would be able to do it anyway. They had nothing to lose by agreeing to his terms. So he and Roy Knabenshue rebuilt the California Arrow, built the entire infrastructure, the airframe that the engine and the rudder mounts on, and then tied that onto the balloon that Tom had bought. And then Roy got to fly it. Captain Tom weighed about 100 pounds more than Roy Knabenshue did, and he was too heavy. When he sat on the airframe, it wouldn't get off the ground even fully inflated with hydrogen. So Roy, 100 pounds lighter, was dubbed chief pilot, and he took off. And as you alluded, Captain Tom is kind of a dodgy character, and the way the contract had been written, it was 4 flights, but there was no definition of what constituted a flight. So there was a 15-foot fence that surrounded the aviation pavilion, and Tom's strategy was get off the ground, hop over that fence, and land. And that's a flight. That's all we've got to do. Don't risk the aircraft. Don't do anything more spectacular than that. Just make that little hop, boop, and we do that 4 times, and we're in the money.
These
Well,
goals.
Roy,
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, please.
No, go ahead, please.
These early goals were modest, right? Just to demonstrate that these machines, that these things can work, right? But at this point, it's the dirigible that seems to have the most confidence among observers in regard to the future of aviation. And yet in the background, there are pilots who are working with heavier than air machines, that is airplanes. And maybe we can talk about John Montgomery, for example. You identified him, or you said that the newspapers called him the father of aviation. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about his role in directing people's focus towards airplanes?
Okay. Yeah. John J. Montgomery was another young man very obsessed with aviation and very interested in how aviation worked. And he went to Santa Clara University and he graduated in 1880. And at that time, he had a lot of free time on his hands. And so he decided he was going to try to work out how birds flew. And so he spent a lot of time studying bird wings, especially gliding birds like raptors, seagulls. And he became convinced that if you're going to build a successful heavier than air machine, the airfoil had to be shaped like a bird's wing. Now, there's a hearty debate amongst all the people who are trying to figure out how to make this work. One school of thought said, no, what you really want is an absolutely flat plane and then just a huge engine in front with enough horsepower just to drag it through the air. So imagine sort of a rocket, if you will, with a big engine on the front that would just pull it through the air. And then there was another school said, no, you have to emulate bird flight. But then they would build very complicated wing structures, and they would have all kinds of moving parts and clockwork parts, and so the wings would flap. Montgomery's innovation was to try to emulate a soaring bird, so like a hawk who holds his wings fixed and basically immobile except just little wing torques to move around. And he's actually going to come up with the idea of a wing that's modeled on a bird's wing and also changes shape in order to affect turns to the left.
Is this the multiplane?
No, that's Zerbe. Sorry.
Okay.
That's another guy. Yeah. No. And so this is the basis of wing warping, which is allegedly the Wright brothers' brilliant innovation and the one that they enforced their patents on. The Wright brothers claim to have come up with it themselves, but actually at the 1893 World's Fair, Chicago World's Fair, there was an aviation symposium, and Montgomery read a paper, which is now unfortunately lost, about wing warping and changing the wing shape to affect changes and modeling wings on a bird. And so when the Wright brothers finally did become interested in aviation, they wrote to Octave Chanute, who was kind of the central figure in aviation at this time, kind of a clearinghouse of ideas, and Chanute sent on some of the ideas that Montgomery had brought out in Chicago. So the Wrights claim to have invented this, but in reality, it's pretty likely they just stole it from John Montgomery. Montgomery went on, he got very interested in electricity also at the World's Fair. He met Nikola Tesla, and he went on and did a PhD in electricity and got a job teaching at Santa Clara University. So he's a professor of electricity by day, and by night he continued his experimentations and started building gliders. So he built some very successful gliders and began testing those in 1905 and 1906. So he was very foundational for heavier than air machines, although not widely acknowledged even to this day.
These early pilots they're keeping tabs on each other. They're trying to find out what each other is doing, but the information environment is not really conducive to, and plus the fact that everybody is so secretive about their operations makes it very hard for pilots to know exactly what's going on in different parts of the country. And yet they team up with each other at various times. They form rivalries with each other. And in fact, the book is filled with stories of sabotage, these rivalries, and these teams that are formed by the various individuals that you discuss, and then their breakups and their formation of different companies. So I wonder if maybe you can talk a little bit about the secretiveness and the competition that is taking place during these years among the pilots.
Yeah. Among the dirigible pilots, I don't think there's as much secretiveness. The dirigibles are not terribly, functionally, they're not that complicated the way that they're being built. What you have in the dirigible side of things is conflict really between Captain Tom Baldwin, who proclaims himself the father of all dirigible aviation, even though August Greth was the first one to come up with this. And there's a wonderful story. In 1907, they had the Gordon Bennett Air Races in St. Louis. And so this was really a big balloon, cross-country balloon race. But once the balloons go, what is there for the spectators to look at? Well, nothing. So the organizers said, well, let's have a race of lighter than air machines and heavier than air machines. So here we are in 1907, and you think, okay, well, here will come the airplanes and they'll hose everybody. And of course, no heavier than air machine gets off the ground. The Wright brothers were invited to come fly. They did not come fly, as they don't. Glenn Curtis was there, but he was actually assisting Captain Tom Baldwin with the engines on one of Baldwin's machines. And so it is the dirigibles that become the star of the show in 1907 in St. Louis. And Tom did this wonderful interview with the newspapers, and he labels himself the Dean of American Aviators. And he talks about how really all the dirigible pilots who are flying now and have become so famous, men like Roy Knabenshue and Lincoln Beechey, they all had learned their art, had his knee, and then because they all hungered more for money than for scientific advancement, they had stabbed in the back and moved on essentially and set themselves up as his competitors, which was true because Knabenshue and Lincoln Beechey are probably the most famous pilots at this time because they're out barnstorming, 8 months of the year, flying at state fairs and all sorts of town sites, showing off what they can do with dirigibles.
And meanwhile, the Wright brothers are conducting their various experiments, and they are, frankly, they don't come off so well in this book. But what do you have against the Wright brothers exactly? Well, why are they the villains of this book?
The Wright brothers, again, at the beginning of our talk today, I gave the Wright brothers credit for what they did, but they were deeply suspicious. They were frightened that they were going to get ripped off before they could get the patent secured on what they claimed were their inventions. That's, in my view, a dubious proposition at best. They were certainly the first to apply these ideas and turn it into a real working airplane. So full credit for that. But the idea that they came up with wing warping, I think, is just nonsense.
It sounds like they thwarted progress by aggressively protecting their patents that they prevented other pilots from making progress.
That's absolutely true. So they were finally awarded patents for their ideas, and the first thing they did is they started suing everybody else who was building airplanes, and so for patent infringement. So they wanted them to buy or to apply for a license from the Wright Motor Company, which had been Wright Aircraft Company, which had now been established. And if you didn't, then they would sick their lawyers on you. And this is they did. They crushed innovation because everything was tied up. American aviation was tied up in lawsuits that really ran until America's entry into World War One. And at that point, the government stepped in and said, look, we've got to start building airplanes now. Enough of this, essentially. But they're extraordinarily litigious, no question about it.
And they're in the East, but the action that you're focusing on is in the West Coast. So let's turn to the Los Angeles Air Show of 1910, because that's really the focal point of this book, and where airplanes are put on display and where they demonstrate their commercial and military potential.
Hmm. That's right. So the the basic trend, I mean, you had the two streams moving forward in tandem in California. So you had the heavier than air experimenters represented by men like J.J. Montgomery, Professor J.S. Zerbe, who we haven't really talked about too much, and then you had the lighter than air school with Roy Knabenshue probably being the most prominent dirigible pilot in California at this time. But the world got a huge shake in 1909. And so in August of 1909, in France, the Reims Air Show was held. And at this point, something we don't talk about very much, but France is one of the leaders in heavier than air machine development. So you had men like Blériot, for instance, who had developed his airplanes. You had André Farman, who had developed a biplane. And so you have all these pilots come together in Reims. Glenn Curtis, who had developed his biplane in the United States under the threat of prosecution by the Wright brothers, was also in the mix. And there was a huge competition in August of 1909. And suddenly you have 7, 8 airplanes in the skies at the same time flying around, and they're setting new records for cross country flights, speed, flights, distances or times around a course carrying a passenger. Farman set a time around the course carrying 2 passengers, which was unheard of at this idea. And in Los Angeles, they got very excited about this. And so there was a particular promoter named Dick Ferris who was working with the city fathers trying to establish Los Angeles as kind of the leading city in California. Now, when we think of California, we think of Los Angeles as being, the center of the state, intellectually, culturally, in all areas. But in 1910, San Francisco was the senior city, the more established city, and LA was just a bit of a young upstart at this time. And so the city fathers are looking for ways to promote Los Angeles and to make it seem like a wonderful place to be. Dick Ferris says, well, look, we've got this incredible weather, 300 plus days a year. It's ideal for aviation. Why don't we turn Los Angeles into a center of American aviation? So up to this point, America's center has been St. Louis. That's probably the biggest one, and the East Coast, where you have the Wright brothers and you've got Glenn Curtis in New York. And so Ferris starts promoting this idea of a 10-day air show in January. Now, in January in the United States, 7/8 of the country is under snow and terrible weather. But here's Los Angeles. We can have a show under bright, sunny days, and the world will pay attention. And so Ferris is a brilliant promoter, and he's one of the very important characters in this book. And he pulls this whole thing together. The Wright brothers are threatening to sue. They're filing for injunctions right up to the day the show opens. And it's not clear whether the show is going to be allowed to open before this. But a judge in New York finally says, no, we'll settle this in 30 days. Let the show go on. And we get Glenn Curtis comes to fly. The Wright brothers, of course, are invited, but they don't come to fly. Why would they? And some French pilots come over with their machines. So Louis Paulin is probably the biggest star of that bunch. And they come over. It's a monumental effort. 10 days before the show opens, Dominguez Field is just a big grassland. They build an entire venue, huge grandstands that will seat 50,000 people. They throw those up in 10 days, and everything goes up. It's just an amazing, amazing triumph. And yeah, January 10th, this air show opens. It's the first time heavier than air machines have flown west of the Mississippi. It's the first time almost everybody at the show has ever seen an airplane in flight. So what you heard about, maybe read about, now you're seeing before your very eyes. And it's stunning. It's absolutely amazing.
It's a huge moment in aviation history, and it's taking place in Southern California, at a moment when Americans and the world are discovering the potential and promise of California. So the air show is in a way kind of a metaphor for exactly this promise and potential of California. You know, I know we only have a few more minutes for our part of the talk, and so I want to make sure I don't neglect the question of how you came to these subjects that you've been exploring in your recent books. You're a classical scholar. You've had a great deal of success as an academic, a translator of classical sources, of classical texts, and a commenter on classical texts as well. And in recent years, you've made this turn toward popular history, focusing on America in the early 20th century. 2 years ago, I believe it was, you published Halley's Comet, a book about Halley's Comet, and set in the early 1900s. And once again, we turn to the early 1900s. So I have to ask, what is it about this period in American history that attracts the attention of a classical scholar?
Serendipity. That's the answer. Complete accident, really. It all came out of a classroom exercise. And so, for a number of years, as Kevin well knows, but probably the rest of the audience doesn't, when I taught at Gonzaga as well. And we have a class there, a senior thesis class. And so, in the final year, our history majors have to write a 10,000 word essay as kind of a capstone project. Many of them struggle with this assignment, even though they've been trained for 4 years or 3.5 years at this time. And so one year I decided that what I would do is when I taught the course, I had 10 different assignments they had to do that would lead to this final output, the 10,000 word thesis. So I said, well, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and I'll model this for them. And I will go and do every exercise just as I imagine they're going to do it. And I'll do it about 2 weeks ahead of them. So as we work through the semester, they can see what I've done, and this will give them some ideas about how to do the assignment that they have to turn in. And I thought at this time, well, it'd be easy. I'll just go write a 10,000 word paper on some aspect of Roman history, which was what I taught. But then I thought, well, that's really kind of cheating because I've spent 20 years in the field and I'm fairly familiar with the material, which they don't have that advantage. So I thought, why not do something I know completely nothing about? And that, early American history, or even 20th century, early 20th century American history filled that bill. And so I went and I just started digging around in newspapers and looking at things, and I came across this story of Halley's Comet. And I worked on that, and I did the exercises for the students, and that 10,000 word thesis just kept growing and growing and growing, and ultimately came that first book out of this period, so set in 1910. While I was working on the Halley's Comet book, I came across these references in the Los Angeles Times to this air show that I'd never heard about and couldn't find any obvious references to it. But as somebody have an aviation background myself many years ago, I was quite fascinated by it. And so when I got done with the Halley's Comet book, I thought, well, I'll just go back and have a look and see what that is. And of course, it is so fascinating that I just couldn't resist writing a second book about that. And yeah, it's an accent. It's the story is what is interesting to me. And so when I'm looking at a book or a book project like this, especially now that I'm writing for more popular audiences, is it a captivating story? Is it an interesting story, one that readers will really resonate with? And this book, I think, is that indeed.
Fantastic. If we have enough time, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what's next in your docket. Do you have any other projects set in this particular period in American history?
Yes and no. I'll tell you a little bit. So Halley's Comet came around the Earth or came around the Sun in 1910. The International Airshow took place in 1910. So there's a clue for the third book, something set in 1910. I'm working on my 1910 trilogy right now, Kevin. And then once I get that done, I'll move on to 1911, I suppose. See what's going on then.
All right, fantastic. So my understanding is that at 4:40, we'd be turning to the next part of the program. I can continue with questions. I have more, but if Omar is ready to step in, we can do that.
Yeah, I don't know. We have one comment, comment, comment. Um, I currently live, or this is from Dave Albert. I currently live in Los Angeles and I'm a retired teacher with the LAUSD. From 1972 to 1983, I taught at Glenn Hammond Curtis Junior High in Carson, California, not far from the site of the 1910 Los Angeles Airshow.
Mhm.
So that's a nice connection there. And I thought I saw a question in the chat. Chris asks, can you speak about Glenn Curtis? I believe Tom Baldwin asked him to build an engine for a dirigible. Was this the one at the LA show?
Uh, yes and no. So, Captain Tom, after he split with Roy Knabenshue and after he split with Lincoln Beachy and some other pilots as well, went and started working with um, Curtis because Curtis, I don't know if you know much about the background of Glenn Curtis, but he started off as a bicycle racer. That was much like the Wrights, who were in the bicycle business as well. So he's a bicycle racer, and then just pedal powered wasn't fast enough for him. So he decided to build a little engine that he could hook to the bicycle and created an early motorcycle. He set a world motorcycle speed record. I can't remember the exact speed. It was over 100 miles an hour on a beach doing that. And then he got interested in aviation. So because he was building these small engines that were small and lightweight, as you would need for a motorcycle, they were easily adapted to early aircraft. So people who wanted one to try their heavier than air machine could buy one, or the dirigible pilots quickly began to favor them in the United States. And so Tom Baldwin knew that Curtis was building these. And so he went and he started fabricating dirigibles up in New York as well. And so they partnered up. I said that Curtis was at the 1907 Gordon Bennett race, and he was there kind of in the pit crew with Tom Baldwin, because Baldwin had come up with this innovative new dirigible design that he was going to spring on everybody. And what it was, so a dirigible usually has, in this time period at least, the propeller would go out the front. So it'd be sticking out the front like a small lighting, a Cessna 150 or something today. And it spins out at the very front of the thing. And so you have an engine right behind that. The problem is when you're spinning it, it does create torque and it tends to yaw the dirigible in one direction or another. So Baldwin came up with this idea of having two shafts, so an outer shaft and an inner shaft that would penetrate that. These would be geared differently. And then at the end of the propeller shaft, you had a propeller that would turn one way and the propeller would turn the other way. So one propeller would turn clockwise, one would turn counterclockwise, and this would cancel out the yaw and the torque. And so he was going to spring all of this on the competitors at the Gordon Bennett race. And so the first heat, he flew just a standard dirigible with the normal propeller. But then they were supposed to fly 4 heats, 4 races. And between the second and the third race, he had his crew with Glenn Curtis swap out one engine, one undercarriage, and stick the other one on. What they had not done is properly balanced it, so they couldn't actually debut this innovation. But Curtis was with Tom Baldwin in St. Louis at that point, and the two men are pretty closely associated going forward.
Excellent, thank you. I don't see any other questions. I encourage people to ask questions, but Kevin, do you have another question you'd like to ask?
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things I found about this book, like with Halley's Comet, is the role of observers, people watching the skies, people looking at the skies for signs of Halley's Comet, people looking at the skies to see these dirigibles in flight or these heavier than air machines being launched as well. I wonder, Richard, if you have any observations about Americans observing change the rapid change that is taking place around this time in the early 20th century. What do you have any thoughts about the crowds? Do you have any thoughts about America at this time and what these particular episodes tell us about Americans as they are observing change taking place?
It's an interesting question, and I wish I had an interesting answer. One of the things I think you put your finger on is how dramatic technology advanced during this period, if you think about it. When I talk about my Halley's Comet book, I make the observation that Halley's Comet flies around the Earth, flies around the sun, excuse me, every 75 years roughly. And so it had come in 1835, and then it came again in 1910, and then again in 1986. Between 1835 and 1910, think about the astonishing changes that happened in that 75-year period. If you had a time machine and could bring some Romans forward to 1835, they would have found the world significantly different, but not that different. So in 1835, shortly after 1835, the first settlers set off west across the continental United States to go and explore this new land on the west coast. And of course, they were in covered wagons being pulled by oxen. In 1910, they would have ridden the railroads across the country, and in a considerably shorter amount of time. In 1835, if you wanted to get somewhere fast, you would hop on the back of a horse. In 1910, you would climb into an automobile, and assuming the road was good enough, you would probably be able to outrun a horse or one of Glenn Curtis's motorcycles, perhaps. And this is happening on every level. And so 1835, if you wanted to go to England, you would have been on a sailing ship. 1910, you would have taken a huge steamship across. Radio has not become broadcast radio yet, but it has been invented. So we're sending messages through the air. We're cabling transmissions across the country with telegraph. I mean, technology is exploding everywhere. And so it is such an amazing period to live through, and you forget about how much had changed in just 75 years. So yeah, when you do see these things like airplanes coming along, it's absolutely life-changing. And I'll tell you my favorite life-changing story. And this is about a young man who came from this part of the country up here in the Pacific Northwest. And he was a young man named William. And he had moved out to the West Coast, to the area kind of halfway down the coast of Washington State, which is called Grays Harbor. And that area around the Olympic National Forest was known as the Green Klondike. So just as people were getting wealthy with gold in Alaska, you could come out and make a huge fortune by cutting timber and shipping it out. William had come out from Michigan, and he had done exactly that. He had made a great fortune. 1910 came around, and he heard there was going to be this fantastic air show in Los Angeles, and like hundreds of thousands of people, he traveled to the city. And that's why we did hint at the fact that Dick Ferris had hoped this would help promote the city. It did. Los Angeles was front page news across the country for that entire fortnight, and people came from everywhere to watch what was happening in those skies. And young William was exactly like that. And so he went down there. He was enthralled by what he saw. He saw Louis Paulin flying. He saw Glenn Curtis flying. And like many people, he begged for a ride. He just wanted to go for a flight on one of these machines. But you can imagine that he is not alone, and there are far too many requests and not enough time to service even a fraction of those requests. And so they turned him down. Now, he might have as much money as Croesus, but in fact, he's not going to get a ride on that particular week. Well, William was very frustrated by this. He was angry, in fact, and said, I'm going to show them. And so he went back, and a year later, he opened a company in Seattle and started building his own airplanes. So if these guys wouldn't take him for a ride, he would build his own airplane and go for a ride. And you've all heard of this William, because if I tell you the name, it's the William Boeing Aircraft Company.
I was waiting for that. Yes.
The punchline. So Boeing actually gets its start because William gets so angry he can't get. I mean, if he'd gotten a ride that day, who knows? He might have just gone back to timber, but no. And he founds one of the most successful aircraft companies in the world based on that.
And we have Boeing today to once again renew our interest in aviation, given the events surrounding or the questions surrounding Boeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I got another question for you. So I'm seeing commonalities between these two books, your book on Halley's Comet and L.A. Birdmen. Another is the role of media in the early 20th century. And I can't help but get the sense that you're a little skeptical about the media.
I think most Americans are a little skeptical about the media at this stage in the game. Yes, one of the main themes of Comet Madness was media malfeasance, in that the media blew up what was basically an interesting science story into a "we're all going to die" sort of story, and they shattered reputations of a lot of very good astronomers along the way by blaming them when we didn't all die. And so that was a dominant theme. I think the media plays it straight for the most part. I was trying to think of some good examples where they went astray on this, but there is one critical exception, and I'll tell you a little bit about this because I think it does help redeem somebody who I've smeared already today. And that was when the Wright brothers actually did make their flight in December of 1903. The first thing they did, once they landed, essentially, is they rushed to the local telegraph operator and transmitted news back to their father in Ohio. We've done it. We've made this flight. Well, the telegraph operator who had to hand it over to another network so it could go to Ohio was very excited when he read what had happened, and he said, "I've got a buddy down at the paper. Can I tell him?" And this was a reporter who worked for the Norfolk, Virginia Pilot. I think that's a very suiting name, the Pilot. Anyway, the Wrights said, "Absolutely not. We'll break it to our own hometown newspaper. They get the glory of the big scoop on this story." But he went ahead and did it anyway. And so, because the Wrights wouldn't talk to anybody, and there were no eyewitnesses that the reporter for the Pilot could get a hold of, he just made the story up. And so, if you go and you read the actual story that he wrote, it's a very strange account. Essentially, it sounds like a person is sitting on a lawn chair. He's got, think about a riding lawnmower. So beneath him is a big propeller that is lifting him up off the ground, and behind him is another propeller that's shoving him forward through the sky. And according to this, Wilbur just went and flew forever, and he was making huge speeds, highly maneuverable, and it's absolute nonsense. This was a media tendency at this point, somehow just to make up really interesting stories. And this kind of set the Wrights back a little bit, in that right out of the gate, the first reported news, and this goes out on the AP wire and gets spread across the country, is this Rube Goldberg sort of device that is thoroughly implausible. So this didn't help people believe that the Wrights had actually flown, but it does kind of poison the water between the Wrights and the media. And so the Wrights are very reluctant to have anything to do with the media. They won't give stories to them. When they start doing their second year of flight tests at Huffman Prairie, outside of Ohio and outside of Dayton, they invite the reporters for the first day, but say you can't write anything sensational, and the photographers can't take any pictures. No pictures of the machine, right? Because they don't want anybody to steal their designs. And so they were very hostile towards the media their whole career.
But there's a tendency, as you noted, for the media to fill in gaps when they don't have all the facts, and sometimes they got the facts wrong when it came to these early flights.
Well, if there were any facts in that first story other than the Wrights flew, I'd be challenged to think of what it might have been.
We have a couple of new questions. Dave has asked, any idea how many spectators attended the 1910 air show?
I do have the final numbers. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was, I think, north of 150,000.
Wow.
Yeah, it was big.
And Gary asked, are you familiar with Charles K. Hamilton? And there's more to it. He flew kites in New York with Israel Ludlow, dirigibles with Captain Baldwin and Roy Knabenshue, and exhibition balloon flights in Japan, 1909, etc.
Yeah, once Knabenshue and Baldwin had kind of done it to begin with, there were a number of people who jumped in and also competed in kind of the air show space. And that is why the dirigible pilots were really the face of aviation until finally, in September 1908, Orville made his first flights for testing for the Wright Flyer, and Wilbur was doing the same thing in France. Yeah. Although I should say Glenn Curtis was the first aviator to do a public demonstration of a heavier than air machine.
I have a question myself. We're at the last few minutes, so maybe this is kind of a big question, but I'm just wondering, like, um, this takes place in that, you know, period right before Hollywood really kicks off in the 1920s.
Hmm.
What were the connections, if any, between um, that industry, that soon to be industry, and the air industry, that early air industry, and were there people filming these air shows or anything like that?
Yeah. So actually, I was looking at this the other day, and I I don't want to say this is dogmatically correct, but I believe it is correct that in 1910 the first movie studio was set up in Los Angeles as well. And the reason that movie studios, the early movie studios, migrated out to California was the weather. You could film, 300 days a year, where you couldn't do that necessarily in other parts of the country. And so um, those two things will overlap to a certain extent. There's when Roy Knabenshue came back after the air show in 1904. He and Tom Baldwin came back to Los Angeles, and there was a short film made of the California Aero flying. I don't believe it exists anymore. So Roy Knabenshue mentioned it in his autobiography, but I was not able to track it down at that time. Knabenshue claimed it was the first movie ever shot of anything. It was of him and his dirigible. So that is not true either, but he did assert that was the case. So there's kind of a competitive spirit among these guys. But yes, there is some very early footage. So I do have some footage of Knabenshue flying his second dirigible, the Toledo #1, flying it over Toledo and also flying over New York. And later on, flying a bigger dirigible that he built. So there are some films made of the very early dirigibles.
And there's
Rounding
another
up to the point.
industry where the French were in the lead at first, only to be surpassed by American filmmakers, one might argue.
I think the French would deny that. I don't think they've been surpassed.
All right, so we're at the last couple minutes. Kevin, I'll give you the last word or last question if you have any left.
Yeah, one question. In fact, Chris Grant is writing in the comments a question about the type of research Richard has done for this book. And so I'd like to fold that into a bigger question about the transition that Richard is making from academic history to more popular history and the kinds of processes that are involved in creating a work of popular history. How is your work different as a crafter of these stories about popular history in early 20th century America as opposed to writing about classical history?
That's an interesting question. I would say the biggest difference is there's just so much more stuff. So if you think about what classics people and ancient historians work on, we work on a pretty fixed canon. I mean, you don't find new classical historians, discoveries of new texts being coming around. I mean, occasionally you find something, but it's really rare. So the texts that we would work with really have been known for pretty much all the 20th century. There's not really a lot that's new there. And one of the things that I noticed when I went to 20th century history is suddenly, oh my gosh, there is just so much
And
written
it's in
about these
English.
subjects. Well, if you're doing American history, yes, it is in English. So I was looking at an Italian project, which is not in English, obviously. But so that is different. Just the amount of primary sources that are out there, and a lot of this material probably has just never been looked at. There's just so much of it. So there's always that sense of discovery. I don't believe there's ever been a book written about the Los Angeles International Air Show. Certainly not a complete book. It's been mentioned, so people have known about it, of course. But for somebody to actually go write a full book about it is somewhat new, and that's because I kind of wandered into materials that really haven't been considered. The other thing that I think makes American history really interesting is the digitization of newspapers. And so 20 years ago, this project would not have been possible, or it would have been possible, but it would have been very difficult because all the old newspapers would have been on microfilm. Where would I find them? Or I'd have to go, town to town, look into old public libraries to see if I could find, copies of these things. And then if you ever worked with microfilm, which I did very early on in my career, it's painful just finding something. You have to look at every single page, whereas you can now do more text searches to at least find where you're looking. Things like Roy Knabendshue's autobiography. Well, it's just a typewritten document. It was never published, but the Library of Congress, they scanned it and it's out there. You can just get it. And all of these materials are now available through the internet, which 20 years ago they wouldn't have been. And that is, I think, revolutionary as well for people who are interested in pursuing these topics.
Great, great. Yes, thankfully, thanks to all those people, mostly librarians who scanned all those documents in. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Richard and Kevin. This has been a really awesome conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
Sure.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and there's the book. Please
L.A.
buy it.
Birdmen in your
We-
bookstores. Mark Twain
Yep.
Bookstore, I believe, as well.
You can buy it through us. You can also buy it anywhere. But just buy it. Yeah, have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you again very soon.
All right. Thank you, Omar.